Okay, welcome back to another live session on Declassified Caribbean Channel. Thank you so much for joining. And this afternoon, we're going to be looking at another interesting topic, China in the Caribbean, investment or control, who really benefits? Now, this evening, we are asking a question that cuts straight to the heart of the Caribbean's future. When billions of dollars flow into a region from China, who is really benefiting? And at what cost? From ports and highways to hotels and digital infrastructure, Chinese investment is reshaping the Caribbean at a pace we've never seen before. Governments call it development, critics call it dependency, but beneath the headline lies a deeper issue: sovereignty. Are we building our nations or quietly handing them over to influences in ways that will define generations to come? And here's the uncomfortable truth: this isn't just about China, it's about power, global competition, and whether small states like ours can truly remain independent in a world dominated by giants. So this evening, we are breaking it all down, and no slogans, no spins, just facts, context, and the hard questions nobody wants to answer. So if you want it more fiery, then let's get with it, and let's get with our fiery discussions and ensure that while we be fiery, we can also be respectful of each other's opinion. So we're looking at China, and I'll open up with this Reddit, right? This Reddit Caribbean. And let me share my screen with you and look at the discussion and what they're saying, the Caribbean members are saying about Chinese influence in the Caribbean region. So let me begin with Reddit first, and then we delve into other things as we go along in the discussion. So the topic is asked here, the question rather is asked: what's the problem of China building up Caribbean countries? That was what was being asked on Reddit. What's the problem of China building up Caribbean countries? And though I'm not here to take sides, this writer is saying, because I don't know the full circumstances, isn't it good that a powerful country like China is helping to build all kinds of infrastructure in some Caribbean countries? Would you guys react the same way if it were Europeans like Spain or Britain or the Netherlands? I'm curious. I've heard people from other countries say that they have an ulterior motive. And I've also heard other people praise them. And some of the responses here were: see why more IT pros are, moving to, is it Altera, the only IT management platform with built-in. Oh, this is actually advertisement. Sorry, they call it debt trap diplomacy, and China allegedly does it. The West, it definitely does it, but we keep hearing how bad it is for China to do it from the West, as if there are the same people who had Haiti pay them reparations for over 100 years. Within the Caribbean, our people are wary as well, but I just see them as victims of Western propaganda. With every loan, there are conditions. We just have to accept the best conditions offered to us. If it's from China, I see absolutely nothing wrong with that. Now, we have another person responding. At worst, it's debt trap diplomacy. They do it. Doesn't mean they will to your country, though, because they need friends in the Americas. At best, it's a way for them to get some influence in the region. You may care less about their invasion of Taiwan after you look at the shiny new port they built you. And this is interesting because we like to look at these shiny things, these shiny highway networks, right? Road networks, and we think that that's development, and we only see through that lens, development through that lens, and not necessarily who benefits. Who is benefit from all of these investments? Are we the people benefiting, or are the global and domestic oligarchs? That's what we need to ask ourselves. There's another article that came from Trinidad, and I think it was from the Trinidad paper, Newsday, right? Newsday, China taking over the Caribbean. That's the question that is being asked, or the statement that is being made. Is China taking over the Caribbean? That's the question being asked. This question echoes across policy circles, academic debates, and public discourse in the region. Over the past 2 decades, China's growing footprint in the Caribbean has become increasingly visible through infrastructure development, trade relations, financial assistance, and cultural exchanges. Critics often raise concerns about sovereignty, debt traps, and geopolitical influence, while others argue that Chinese engagement provides much needed opportunities for economic development and modernization. Nowhere is this duality more evident than in TNT and Jamaica, two nations that serve as critical case studies in assessing China's Caribbean strategy and its implications. China's interest in the Caribbean is part of its broader Belt and Road Initiative, that's the BRI, a global development strategy that aims to expand trade and infrastructure networks connecting Asia with Africa, Europe, and the Americas. The Caribbean, despite its relatively small size, holds significant strategic value. Located near key maritime routes with voting power in international organizations and access to valuable natural resources, Caribbean nations are essential partners in China's geopolitical and economic vision. This interest has translated into a variety of large-scale projects funded or constructed by Chinese firms, often backed by Chinese state loans. In TNT, that's Trinidad and Tobago, China's influence has grown substantially since the two countries established diplomatic ties in 1974. Trinidad became the first English-speaking Caribbean country to sign on to the BRI in 2018, setting the stage for a closer partnership. Among the most visible Chinese-led projects is the construction of the Cuba Children's Hospital, the National Academy for the Performing Arts, and the Phoenix Park Industrial Estate. These developments have modernized infrastructure and expanded public services. The industrial estate, for instance, is designed to attract foreign direct investment, promote manufacturing, and create employment objectives that align with TNT's diversification goals beyond oil and gas. And that has not yet happened, has it? The diversification. China's involvement in Jamaica is even more extensive, the writer is suggesting here. The island has received billions of dollars in Chinese loans, leading to the construction of highways, hotels, and other infrastructure. One of the most talked about projects is the North-South Highway, which links Kingston to the northern city of Ocho Rios. This highway has significantly reduced travel time and enhanced mobility, thereby boosting the tourism sector. Chinese companies have also undertaken major projects such as the construction of the Trelawney Stadium and upgrades to the Norman Mann International Airport. These investments have visibly improved Jamaica's physical infrastructure, offering tangible benefits to both citizens and the economy. However, the growing Chinese presence has sparked controversy and concern. Critics question whether these projects are economically sustainable and politically wise. Many Chinese loans come with high interest rates and repayment terms that could burden small economies. In Jamaica, concerns about rising debt levels prompted the government to shift toward public-private partnerships and tighter fiscal management in recent years. In TNT, the government has faced scrutiny over the terms of Chinese-financed projects and the transparency of awarding contracts to Chinese firms. While both countries maintain that Chinese partnerships are critical to their national development, critics argue that reliance on China could compromise long-term sovereignty and economic independence. Now, these are some of the things that we are looking at. We sometimes look at China as just a country who wants to improve on our infrastructure. But at what cost? We've got to really ask ourselves that hard question. And many of us don't want to ask that hard question because it appears to me that it is not what everybody is saying, right? But that's not thinking. We're here to have this group think. We're here to ask the hard questions, because if we don't ask the hard questions, then we are on the road to slavery. And one of the greatest challenges that we're facing here in the Caribbean at this moment, and perhaps the world at large, is the fact that many people are still suffering, going through mental slavery. In fact, they have allowed themselves to run with the program, not to think for themselves. And as a result of that, we find ourselves in a very, very tight spot. And we haven't seen the half yet. But let's go through some other clippings and see what what other people are saying before we get into our discussion. Let's begin with Umar Johnson, Dr. Umar Johnson, and his take on Chinese investments in Jamaica, what his opinions are. All right, so let's put him on the platform.
Has allowed the Chinese to come in and take over. I believe they own the major port there. I believe that the Jamaican government has given them lands in exchange for services. I believe they built at least one hospital there, a couple of schools. They had constructed a north-south highway or northwest highway that connects one part of the island to the other, so you don't have to drive all the way around to get there, which was necessary. But from what I read, in exchange for them building the highway, the Jamaican government has allowed them to keep, I believe, nearly all of the toll fees on that highway for a certain amount of years. We're giving up too much to get too little. And what bothers me the most about Jamaica, they are the most Pan-Africanist and the most unapologetic of the Caribbean islands. And so if China can take Jamaica, taking the rest of the Caribbean won't be that difficult.
Okay, so we understand even during slavery, all right, we understand the importance of the land, right? We understand the importance of the land. And oftentimes when we gave to China, when we are going through these loans, right, these loan agreements, it's not just about lending money at what interest rates and what comes afterwards. The fact is that we are also giving them prime lands, right, like our ports or airports or bridges, and the Chinese are taking advantage of these things. And if they're controlling our lands, then it means, therefore, that we're going back to slavery. Because during slavery, the land was very important, was a powerful asset for the slaves. But what we're seeing now, our islands are being divvied up by these oligarchs and being given to these foreign investors, such as the Chinese people. Now, we're not suggesting here that we're comparing, as some of you like to do, oh, America is doing that, or Great Britain is doing that. We are not here to compare and to behave childishly, as many of us like to reason childishly. We're here to ask the hard questions so that we can be able to combat any of these slave-like qualities that we're seeing here right throughout the Caribbean. Let's greet some of you. We have bonjour, everyone, and welcome to the program, Super Batman Bro. And we have Satian Primus saying Jamaican government does not have the funds, collaterals for this highway project, so they're trying to give it one hand and take with the other. Right? Do we really need highways in our very small island states? And if we do need highways, do we need to be paying those high tolls that we're paying right now? Because we are saying right now, for example, the north-south highway in Jamaica, many people are finding that they're not able to afford it. So how many people are going to be able to ride on those highways, those modern highways? So shouldn't we just have wonderful roads, paved roads that take us from one location to the other? Because at the end of the day, the majority of the people, due to the costs of the tolls, won't be able to ride on these highways. And what is the government doing? Should Jamaica, for example, a very small country, a small dot on the map, should they be paying 5,000 and 2,000 for tolls, or should it just be 300 back and forth? 300 to go, 300 to come back. Wouldn't they make more money on that? Or do they prefer to have these very expensive tolls and many people can't ride on it? What profit are they really going to make? So we have to ask ourselves these very hard questions. Do we prefer to see development of a first world standard as we yearn for? At the same time, that development is impoverishing us. in terms of the costs that we have to pay. So we must understand, we must ask ourselves, do we want these infrastructure? What benefit are they to us? And Super Batman is saying, as a Haitian, I've lived outside of Haiti in the USA with my adopted family. I am concerned. We all have to be concerned about what China is doing here in the Caribbean. Not only China, all of these direct investments, right? The foreign direct investments that they're telling us about. Now, Sentient Prime is saying, is America going to fund projects in Jamaica? Hell no, not in a million years. Look what happened with the money that was raised for Haiti earthquake relief. It disappeared. Yeah, and we're saying the same thing here for China. They're funding the projects, but at the same time, it's a different way that they're doing it, Sentient Prime. So we can't compare oranges to apples or apples to oranges. What we have to do is to look carefully at the methods that they're using to enslave us, right? So one might use a direct method, one might use an indirect method. And Chinese people, if you study them carefully, they often use indirect methods, subtle methods to enslave you to make something. Even some of the things we're purchasing from them, we think it's cheap, right? But if you look carefully at how they set their prices, you will see that the price is expensive because guess what? They're getting tax evasions, they're getting other things that perhaps ordinary citizens are not going to be getting. So we have to look carefully, thoroughly at these agreements, and oftentimes we do not do that, and it's going to be to our detriment. But what I see here is this childish behavior, lack of knowledge, saying that, oh, the Americans are not doing that, or we can't reason like that. That is not critical thinking. Critical thinking means that you're looking at every side and you're trying to see the pros and the cons. And oftentimes, as a region, we're too lazy to do that. We love to see these highways that look like, oh, they're in a first world country. And that is what we think is development. And at the same time, our minds lack development. And we have to look at these things. Then we have, which is the best of the two evils, pick your poison. If you have two evils, none can be better. And I think that we have also fooled ourselves into thinking like that. That is romanticized thinking. If you have two evils, none is better. They're both evil. And we do the same thing too with our elections. We vote for the same thing, or the left or the right? And then what happened? Conservative or liberal? And at the end of the day, the agenda remains the same. So we have to look at the methods that they're using to control us, and not necessarily at who are the better, or which is the better of the two evil, because that is too simplistic in an argument to make. And this is how we end up where we are now. Whether the States or the Caribbean, we find ourselves choosing between two evils, and it's going to happen ad nauseum and without any sort of end, right? Infinity. Now, we have here the conscious-minded Jamaicans are making these decisions with their eyes wide open. They're not conscious-minded, right? That's the whole point, that they're not conscious-minded. The Caribbean on the whole is not conscious. If you should ask me, the Caribbean islands on the whole, whether it's Jamaica, Barbados, we are just not conscious citizens. We are just there to follow what we see on the media about what is first world, and some of us have been to some of these first world countries. We yearn for this sort of facilities, and it's okay, right, to yearn for them, but can we afford them? And if we can afford them, at what cost? Nothing is wrong in having highways, but what I'm saying to you, when we're having to pay those high tolls and giving away our prime assets, it means, therefore, that something is fundamentally wrong. People will talk about the IMF. And years ago, when people would say, wow, Air Jamaica or other prime assets that we had in Jamaica, why are they privatizing it? Why are they giving it? Oh, well, we couldn't afford it as a state. Yeah, but so you sell over our assets to private entities, and then what happens afterwards? We remain indebted to them. They exploit us. The same thing with the electric companies, the water companies, and the service is not even better than when it was in the hands of the public sector. So these are the things that we have to, the reasoning that we have to do, We cannot just live and say that, oh, this is better or this is not better, or we should choose the better of the two poisons. That is nonsense. How can you choose the better of the two poisons? Poison is poison, right? And it's time for us to open up our minds and begin to think and to reason from cause to effect, which we cannot do in this region. Now, we have here a very interesting article that we have it says here that China increases control of ports in America and the Caribbean. They are increasing, right? Why is this here? Let me just see if I could take this off. Yeah, right. They're increasing their investments in control, not investment only, but control of Caribbean ports in Latin America and the Caribbean. Let me see if I could share my screen with you so that you can see what we are talking about. But the Caribbean is on the road for enslavement, and that is a fact. And if we don't want to wake up, too bad for us, because it's coming and we are going to cry. But at that time, it's going to be way, way too late. We have to wake up and we have to learn to think and to reason, which is something very difficult for us to do. Let's go now to the, so we have this, China. So China increases control of ports in Latin America and the Caribbean. That's what this writer is saying. Chinese companies have investment and operating agreements in at least 37 ports on the American continent. Experts warn that Chinese port companies could use this infrastructure for military purposes in a hypothetical conflict. Another risk is the control of international trade outside the decisions of states. Now, China controls a third of the deep water ports in Latin America and the Caribbean. A study by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, that the CSIS, found that Chinese companies are main investors or administrators of at least 37 ports out of 118 in the region, according to the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. That is ACLAC, or CECLAC. Now, the names of Chinese-owned companies such as Costco Shipping Company, China Merchants Port Holdings, and Hutchinson Port Holdings are becoming increasingly familiar with the investment jargon of port systems in the Americas. China has a greater presence in Brazil, where it controls 11 ports, and investments in infrastructure has been increasing since 2018. Mexico follows with 4 ports under Chinese control. Mexican and Caribbean ports, such as Kingston in Jamaica, are considered strategic due to their proximity to the United States in the event of a hypothetical military conflict, right? In addition, port control is key to the development of international trade. This gives China the power to influence the restructuring of trade relations between nations. Now, that to me is a lot of power, right? That to me is a lot of power that the Chinese people have over the region. And it is something that we have to talk about. We can't just say that, wow, that has to go because, we have to choose between the better of the two evils. No, that's not how it's going to work. Now, let's see what you're saying here. I am already crying. Yeah, because it is something that is dangerous. It is something that is dangerous, and I don't think that Caribbean people or citizens are taking it seriously. We only look at what America is doing, and because America is the visible empire of the world and doing some terrible things in the world, we think China is quiet and she is building bridges and she's controlling ports, and it's okay for her to do that because guess what? We don't have the money to do it, so we're going to allow China to do it, and then when everything begins to collapse in terms of the fact that we are enslaved, then we cry foul. Have you ever wondered why the transatlantic slave trade happened? And we talk about our ancestors every day, but I think we are reliving that experience in which we are literally giving over our assets, what we own, to these people, thinking that they are superior to us. Thinking that they are superior to us, and it is going to have very serious consequences in the future. Now, we have here, totally agree, poison is poison. Absolutely, right? And evil is evil. All right, so we have to now wake up to see that that is so. Now let's look at another clipping of what is happening in the region, because so many things are happening that we have to get ourselves, acquainted with them. And there's just so much ignorance and arrogance in the Caribbean region. People think they know when they don't know. All right, so let's get to another clipping. Where am I here? Let me could take this out here. I might have to come out here. Give me a second, guys. Let me get. Okay, right. All right, good. I'm back on the stage. Yeah. All right. Let me show the clipping that I was looking to show you right now. So let's go for the clipping, and let's please share the live so that we can get more people on the live for the platform to discuss this very important. So let's look at this guy showing us here mechanics in Jamaica and how the Chinese was taking over that sort of industry. So let's look at that, and then we can discuss what he's saying here.
Into Jamaica. Well, here are the facts. Did you know that in 2015, Jamaica signed away the Kingston Freeport, our main port, our lifeline, to China, who has full control for 30 years? Now they control what comes in and they control what goes out. That's why the Chinese mechanics and other companies move the way they want. No one to answer to. No real checks. No oversight. They run the port, they hold the gate. Why do you think it's after the fact Pika stepped in? Because they don't even know what's going on. But somebody know. Because when it comes to these little things, don't think you can think on the same level you were programmed to think on. You have to change your frequency.
Yeah, let me go back to that thing.
House, we can't even act like we never know. Listen, we will never get out of slavery. Because a nation that can't even control its own port is a nation already conquered, just without the chains.
Okay, so we have a situation in which recently, in recent times, we heard that there were Chinese mechanics who just had set up shops in Jamaica, right? And the government was pretending as if it didn't know what was happening. But what this guy's suggesting here is that there was an agreement in 2000 and was it 15, 16, he said, right, in which the government had signed that contract between the Chinese mechanics to be there. So when the government pretends as if it does know what the Chinese are doing in Jamaica or in the Caribbean at large, they do know, they sign contracts, but a lot of time the contracts are not properly, they're not transparent, right? So we don't know the clauses, the conditions that are spoken about or, that are discussed within that contract. And then we wake up and we see things happening and they're strange, and the government pretends as if they're working on it, they didn't know about it. And that's exactly what they always do. And this is what we have to say. So we have to demand transparency. Stop thinking that this one, empire, economic empire, whatever you want to call it, superpower, if you want to call it that, global power, China, is innocent, while the other power is the culpable one. We've got to call a spade a spade. Do you know, for example, during the years of the transatlantic slave trade, we always also, they compared what the British did to the Spanish, to the French, and with other empires. But they were all empires. They were all empires, and that's what they did. Their virtue, their goal was to destroy, to pillage, and to plunder, and to rape us of our resources. But some people were arguing that the French were better than the British, or the British better than the French, or this one was better than the other. No empire, no imperial conquest is better than the other. And that is what we have to understand. Now, let's look at another important piece of information that we need to know. Let's look at another clipping coming from, let me get my thing here and share another clipping with you, because we have to discuss this very important topic. So we have here Chinese taking over the Caribbean ports. This is what we have been talking about. So listen to this one.
Just hours from Florida. While America watches the South China Sea, Beijing is quietly taking over the Caribbean. In 2022, China finished a massive port in Jamaica that can dock warships. They told everyone it was for trade, but U.S. Navy satellites spotted something else. Deep water berths perfect for submarines and radar towers that can track American naval movements. This isn't just Jamaica. China has built or upgraded ports in the Bahamas, Barbados, and Trinidad. Each one comes with the same story: economic partnership and trade deals. But each one also comes with the same features: deep harbors, reinforced docks, and communication towers. The Bahamas port sits just 60 miles from Florida. Chinese ships now regularly dock there, officially for maintenance and supplies. Pentagon officials call it a shadow naval presence. These small Caribbean nations get billions in Chinese investment. China gets strategic positions that could choke off American shipping lanes and monitor submarine bases in Kings Bay, Georgia. America's backyard isn't American anymore, and most people have no idea it's happening.
Okay, so when we look at these things happening and we're seeing what they're doing with the surveillance, we understand now. I think now everybody understands that the world, not only China or the United States, but the entire world is building what we call a global surveillance state. Right? We all know that they're trying to push us into a digital economy in which they will control everything that we do. And that is what sometimes surprises me. Having known that, having studied that, having discussed these topics about surveillance in the region, in the world at large, people tend to look to pit and think that one empire or one global power is better than the other, when they are all working together to form this global surveillance state, or states, if you will, okay, that will track and trace every movement. So notice that the United States is saying that China is an enemy in the region. At the same time, China is building these surveillance equipment, right? They're placing these things on the ground, on the water, right? So to be able to track and trace everything that we do. So on one end, we see distractions of wars and rhetoric, suggesting that the US is against China. At the other end, they're doing the same thing. All of them are doing the same things. And that is the whole matter of surveilling human movement, moving us, transitioning us into the digital economy. But yet still we say, oh, they're enemies. Enemies of whom? In the same way that we have to look at the economics and we're saying, who does it benefit? Who does all of the port control and the building of technologies underwater and the ports and all of that? Who is benefiting from that? Are the Chinese benefiting from it? Are the oligarchs benefiting from it? Or the guys who want to push us into a one world new world order? Are these the people benefiting from it? We've got to ask ourselves these hard questions, but we're behaving like children and saying China is better and the United States is our enemy. And we've got to understand that both are our enemies. So we have here, yes, they're all the same. Yes, they are working together. And we should know that the pandemic should have opened our eyes, and somehow it seems that we have been lulled back to sleep, that the entire world was actually built around that one agenda. And by the way, we could see that after that pandemic, which has not ended, by the way, and that's why tomorrow I'm going to talk about the religion of science. Tomorrow I have programmed live the religion, where I will discuss the religion of modern science, because it is a religion. Okay, and they're telling us that we have to do these things, and they're laying the foundation to control everything. The mark of the beast movement is here. So whether it's China or it's the United States or it's Russia, they are all working globally to unite the entire world. so that they can control the entire world. And many of us are still finding ourselves, oh, China is better than the United States, or vice versa. That is not true. And stop looking at the West and the East, because eventually, just like the pandemic, they're all going to unite in a system of global government, which is going to affect you, which is going to enslave you, better said. Right, let's move on to another clipping, because we have to get our acts together. And I find it that we are just living in a region where people are just simply just joking around, as if we're in ordinary times, when this is something very serious we're discussing and talking about. Now, let us look at Jamaica becoming a Dubai. Right? They're all putting us and telling us that we are going to become a new Dubai or a new Singapore and all of these things.
Labor
And
island for the Jamaicans. Their prime minister just stated that the future of Jamaica is going to be Dubai or Singapore. You already see what's going on in Dubai. None of the workers live in Dubai. If they do, they live in labor camps. And the ones that do come there to work, they transport them from like far away. So they're going to push all the Jamaicans inland. This is the future of Jamaicans. They're going to push them inland, and they're going to be permanent workers and permanent tenants, because they're not going to be able to own anything. They're just going to transport them to these major cities like Kingston and Montego Bay just to work. That's going to be their prime purpose, is to work. So yeah, Jamaica is not being built for Jamaicans. It's being built for foreigners with money. Yeah, he said, yeah, Jamaica is Dubai. Jamaica is Singapore. So that leaves the Jamaicans, the locals, out of that economy, out of that society. And how could they possibly compete? Like, your average Jamaican is making anywhere from a couple of $100 to maybe $2,000 a month. This is their average wages. Even the middle class is already, being pushed out and displaced. So yeah, I don't know. The future for Jamaicans don't look too bright, man. It's going to be an island of paradise for foreigners and just an island of labor for the locals.
Right. Now, one of the things that he perhaps does not know is that it's not only Jamaica, right? It's going to be right in the United States too, right? It's the entire world. And if you look at what Miss Mia Motley is saying in Barbados, she's actually saying the same thing, right? She's also saying the same thing, that Barbados is going to become the new Dubai, the new Singapore, and they're all saying it. They're all using the same playbook, and they're saying sending the same message, the same signals to us, and people are still finding themselves asleep. Somebody's asking the question, well, they're not working together, but they are two different entities of the same point. They're working together, okay? Because if the Chinese, and did you read what happened during the pandemic? And that should be your blueprint, that the United States, right? The same guy there, the one who was the director of that scientific organization, they worked with China on the virus. Afterwards, the vaccine thing, the entire world was following the same thing, under the WHO and the World Economic Forum and the United Nations. That's why we have something called the United Nations. If you read the history of the United Nations, Americans were against the United Nations, Okay, it was first about the World Council, because they understood, the United States citizens then understood that the world had always wanted to come together. And they knew that if they should unite the world with organizations like these, it means, therefore, that tyranny is what they're working towards. Now, do they have a similar worldview? No. They have different worldviews. However, as you hear the Rastafarians calling it, it's a Babylonian system. Babylon was a system of confusion. But at the same time, Babylon was an empire. Okay? So we're seeing a confused state in which we don't know where they're going, who is friend from who is not friend. But our thing is not to join up with any of them, because at the end of the day, the money class and the more powerful ones are the ones who are going to run the show. So that's what we have to understand. They're working together. And the pandemic should have been our guiding light to say that this is what is happening, because none of them was fighting at that time. They waited until after the vaccines were dispersed, then they started to fight. Now, same script we should have learned from COVID. Absolutely. And COVID, it was not only about a virus. They're thinking that this was only about a virus. This had to do with our economics, our cultures, and they're now telling us that we're living in this global village and that we should accept immigrants coming from wherever. And by the way, some of you are already deceived, thinking that Miss Mia Motley and Andrew Holness of Jamaica are only going to, to invite Africans, but they will begin with Africans to sort of soothe the people who are a part of the Pan-Africanist worldview. That we're inviting our African brothers and sisters, and then you're going to see the Chinese, and afterwards the people from all over the world are going to come in and displace you. Because as the guy was saying here on the video, that's what they're doing. If you're going to become the new Dubai of the Caribbean, it means therefore that you will have to accept what? Slave labor. That will compete with your free labor, which will mean that you're going to push you out of the market. Right? That is what they are going to do. But many of us, we are still sleeping, don't want to wake up. So we have to keep sleeping until it happens. We see it happening. Let's look at something else that we can see them moving in the direction of Dubai, right? The Dubai of the region. All of us are going to be like Dubai or Singapore, as it were. What a world, what confusion, what ignorance that we're
about
living.
Immigration and migration is rooted in racism
In what
rather
way?
than rooted in the needs of a country. I think that people are fearful of becoming a minority in
Yeah.
their own country, and that's natural. You can't think that. But at the same time, without the influx of people, you're not going to be able to stabilize or get the growth that you need as a country. And one of the problems is that in the world, we have worked out how to move money. Nobody worries about how to move money globally. But as soon as you start talking about moving people, everybody gets nervous. And in December 2018, I think, at the OACP, Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States in Nairobi, I made the point, and I continue to make it, that we need a proper deal for migrants. And this notion of people having to drown just because they want a better life when countries elsewhere actually need them and can provide opportunity and dignity to them, something is fundamentally wrong.
Right. So is she correct, though? She's lying because she's suggesting that people are not concerned about global capital, right? But as soon as we talk about migration, people are concerned. Aren't we concerned about global capital? Yes, we are. Right, this whole matter of we see these privatization of our public sector, right, of our water, of our electricity. People have always expressed concern about these things. So Miss Mia Motley is lying here, right? But yes, we understand that this is going to be the final lap now, the final stage before they actually enslave us. That they have all these labor. The slave labor coming into our respective countries, and then they will tell us that there are jobs, but guess what? You don't want it. So we had to bring in people who were willing to work. But Miss Mia Motley is suggesting that we're just some people who are afraid of immigrants, right? As if the Caribbean has never had immigration before, right? We are a region of distinct peoples, people coming from all over the world. So why would we be afraid of migrants? We are not. It's just that we are afraid that something is happening where they are about to enslave all of us by bringing these cheap laborers or bringing people with capital who are wealthy to displace those of us who are not as wealthy as they are, to build technocracies that we have been talking about. So that's what we have to look at. Now, Maria is saying it sounds like they want the native Jamaicans to be a permanent underclass. That's what they're working towards. And the world, not only Jamaica, but this is the blueprint for the world. And China is not better in terms of wanting that to happen. And don't think that the Chinese large middle class that is still there is going to be always there. It's not going to always be there. That is going to change very soon. And you're going to call my name. That is going to change very soon, because the world is moving in a direction that is almost frightening, okay? And people are not taking it very seriously. Then we have here, for Caribbean people, most Caribbean people, there are more interesting destinations in the Caribbean to visit other than Jamaica. We, as Caribbean people, know that. But what is that about in terms of, it's not about destination? And who can, all of the Caribbean islands and destinations are not owned by them. Tourism is not owned by them. So whether it's Jamaica or it's Puerto Rico or it's Barbados or wherever they are going, the tourism industry is not owned by the locals there. So it's just almost like it's a new brand of slavery. Tourism is really a new form of slavery in modern times. Now, Senton is saying these Arabs are slowly making their way to Jamaica as more Jamaicans try to leave hardship in Jamaica. Foreigners with money are coming, so it's a bi-directional train at the expense of Jamaicans. But as I was saying, it's happening in the Caribbean region. It's not only happening in Jamaica, it's happening right throughout the region. These are policies that our leaders are actually formulating, and it's seeing, as you're saying here, the very skilled, right, leaving while the money class is moving right into our different countries. So this is a Caribbean agenda. It's not only happening in Jamaica. Now we have, yes, I know Fauci was working on that project here in South Carolina. We are aware of that. Yes, and he worked with the Chinese. Right? He worked with the Chinese. And don't tell me that the CIA wasn't working with China at the time. They were, because the research is showing us that the CIA was involved in the production of the virus, the manufacturing of the virus. So when you talk about, oh, this is whatever Western propaganda, the CIA works with Western propaganda, and they also work with Eastern propaganda. We have to understand that, but we want to say, oh, everything is Western and Western is that. But we must understand that we're living now in a global village in which we're getting information that is highly questionable from both ends, from the West and from the East, from the North and from the South. Right, she's lying. She's lying, because we have been talking about the whole matter of the imbalance in terms of capital flowing from the north to the south and vice versa. We have been talking about that forever. That was what Life and Debt that featured Michael Manley of Jamaica was talking about. The whole matter of the fact that these wealthy nations, along with the IMF and the World Bank, they are extracting from us. In fact, Miss Mia Motley is on record suggesting too that when these institutions lend the first world money, they charge them an interest rate of 2 or 3%, while in the South we are charged 15-14% on our debt. So we have been having that conversation for a while. So I'm not sure what world Miss Mia Motley is living in. And Pedro is saying she is depending on your emotions for humanity. Right, you're right. I agree with you. I agree 100% with you, Jamal. Now we have Fauci and the Chinese were working on that project, that COVID project together in the Caribbean. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, right, correct. Right. And so if they're enemies, how is it that the Chinese are allowed to work on that? And also at the universities, and you forget Sentient about the universities too, Harvard University and other universities, the Chinese students, PhD candidates were working on these things too. Right now in the United States, they have laboratories, right? They have these laboratories in which they are experimenting with these whatever diseases that they will eventually unleash on the population. Right now as we speak, but people have gone back to sleep. Oh, we're living, and then when things come upon them, they begin to cry. And that is why it's good for them to do whatever they're doing to you, because we are living in a wicked generation. And whatever is happening to us, we deserve it. I'm sorry, but we deserve it, because we just don't want to take warnings. We want to just move on and think we're going to have a revolution and then we're going to win these people. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. You have to have a revolution of your thinking first, And then we can have whatever revolution that you think you want to be engaged in. All right. But your minds are still not revolutionized. Now, then we have the citizens of the Caribbean will work as servants and handmaids. And that's what we're doing. And I think we love to do it because at the what? The expense of we are developing. We have highways. We have big malls. We have this and we have that. And we are asking the question, at what cost? Are we having these wonderful highways and these great malls, right? And these foreign direct investments, at what costs? And for whose benefit? And for whose benefit? Then we have, but Motley will not tell us that, correct? She's not going to tell us that because she is a part of the global agenda. Then we have, it's a UN agenda on migrants. It is. It is. It's a United Nations agenda in which they want to remove all the barriers so we can all be one world and we can accept each other's culture and we can just say everything is kumbaya. The same thing they're doing to culture is the same thing also they are doing to religion. All of us are the same. So Muslims and Christians and Hindus and people who practice indigenous religions, you know, Obeah and all of the religions you practice. By the way, there is somebody who has a podcast in the Caribbean who doesn't like to talk about religion, but she's always praying at the altar. I'm saying, so what altar are you praying at if you don't want to talk about religion? But you're praying, I'm praying at the altar. To whom are you praying to? To whom are you praying when you're praying at the altar, but you're not religious? Wow. Wonderful thing. Now, then we have the government's got to do better. Something is definitely fundamentally wrong with the governments. Well, the governments are not going to change, as we're saying, because the governments are working for the masters. They have their masters too, you know. Okay, so while it's a hierarchy. So we are slaves to the government is enslaved to the money class, the elites, right? So that is how it works. There's a hierarchy that they're doing the job of the people who brought them into power. So they're not working on our behalf, and I've been saying that for a long time. So we can sit there and chat and think that the government is going to do, and if Miss Miyamoto leaves tomorrow, things are going to change in Barbados. It's not going to change because the next person that comes is going to work on behalf of the same people who are not leaving because the same money class. And they have money and they'll have money for infinity. Okay? Now, you remember about a decade ago, Ukraine was classified as a Nazi state. It was. And we wonder, ours too, ours too. Right? Yeah, I like what you said, President Jamad. Yeah, she's absolutely playing to bail. Right? Because do you see the pretense here? The pretense we have here in the region, praying at the altar, but I don't want to hear about religion on my program. So to whom are you praying? Right? And every day there are lots of people praying at that altar, waiting for Miss Miyamoto to leave office, right? Okay. Now let's go to another video and let's look at some of other perspectives that people are sharing with us. Miyamoto defending Dubai. I think I did this already, right? I think we looked at this before. Yeah, I think we looked at this. So let me share another one with you. We have long looked at this. So let me get here and get the other one here on the screen. Jeffrey Sachs. Look at Jeffrey Sachs. Let me ask those of you who know Jeffrey Sachs. He is somebody who comes on YouTube often and speaks about
students to come to study in China, to see this wonderful country, to learn about Chinese civilization. I would like Chinese universities to offer a semester abroad for American students because hundreds of thousands of American college students every year take a semester abroad and earn credits for their degree back in the United States. We need more of those students coming to visit China. This is very important. So I'm working with some Chinese universities to develop semester-long programs so that American students come, because I think it will change their lives and improve the understanding between the U.S. and China for many, many years, even decades to come. They will learn about one of the world's great civilizations. They'll see one of the most dynamic economies in the world. They'll see technology that they will not see anywhere else in the world. They'll see, by the way, that electric vehicles are becoming the automobile fleet of China, and that's a good message for the whole world. So they'll learn a lot, but most importantly, they'll make friends with young Chinese students. And I can tell you from my own life experience, those friendships will last a whole lifetime and be very, very enriching. So this would be a huge, wonderful opportunity. I'm absolutely sure that if I were a young student in college, I would take a semester in China to learn about this great civilization that's playing such a profound and positive role in the world today.
Interesting. So from a man who is very influential, right? Somebody who comes and Americans respect him because of his eloquence. He's a professor at Columbia University, and he's also responsible for the Department of Sustainable Development at Columbia University. So when you talk about sustainable development, what are we talking about? The World Economic Forum, the United Nations. That is the sort of propaganda that Jeffrey Sachs actually preaches on every platform that you go on. And every platform, almost all of the geopolitical platforms in the United States on YouTube, he is on them, because he plays a special role in terms of conditioning the minds of Americans and the world at large that China is the model. China is the model of where the West should be, right? And I'm sure that Professor Sachs understands the history of China, but he has an agenda. And what is Professor Sachs' agenda? Let's look at what your comment here, Cynthia Prime. You said we deserve it. I said to my father some months ago, we as Afro-melanated people need to go back into slavery. It's sad for me to say this, but this is the reality of how I feel at this moment. Yeah, it is sad. It's all we want. We want them to go back to slavery, but it's because of the minds that they have. We have access to information, right? At the same time, we're not using it. We're not taking advantage of that information. And wherever the crowd goes to, that is where we are going to go. We don't want to sit by ourselves and say, you know, what that person is saying is true. Let me think about it more carefully. Let me, let me dissect it. No, I have to run. My friend is running there. I have to run with them. You say the same thing. You hear people repeating the same things, the same lines, almost like you're a part of one of these sororities and what do you call them now? The fraternities, right? You're repeating lines, and you don't understand the lines that you're repeating. And you talk about religion. That is a secular religion where you can't use your mind. Blind religion. Now, so we have the information you're looking at is all USA propaganda. Now, you tell me what is USA propaganda, because everything is USA propaganda. So you don't have Chinese propaganda. Okay, so when Jeffrey Sachs is speaking and telling US to go, that's not propaganda. That's not propaganda. Where is the thinking? Okay, I'm not even sure you know what US propaganda is. And I'm sure that you're one of the people who took the pandemic, the vaccine. Sure. Right? Because everything is US propaganda, right? The US doesn't say anything truthful. Everything that comes from China or comes from Russia, that is truth, right? But nothing that comes from the West is truthful. What idiocy is that, right? Truth can come from anywhere, and that is what you've got to understand. Grow up and learn to think. Now let's go on to the next, let us look at who Jeffrey Sachs is, just to make sure that we know who this man is, right? Because he's somebody who is talking a lot and has a lot of opinions on global, events, and is somebody that we have to research. Don't just sit down and listen to people, even me. You have to do your research. All of these the Tucker guy and all of these people, you've got to know where they're coming from. All right, let me see if I can share this with you. This is what I had here, Jeffrey Sachs, right? So we have Sachs' Vatican appointment cements odd-couple relationship with the Pope, right? And this is what is coming out of the Vatican. Now, with Pope Francis's appointment of renowned economist Jeffrey Sachs to the Pontifical Academy for Social Sciences last week, perhaps the world's leading critic of global capitalism, the world's leading critic of global capitalism, has formalized his partnership with one of the world's most prominent experts in economic affairs. While this might seem like an odd pairing at first blush, given the Pope's repeated criticism of the capitalist system, it cements a bromance of sorts between Pope Francis and Sachs that has been budding since Pope Francis's election in 2013. Sachs, 66, was appointed an ordinary member of the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences, passed on Monday, October 25. Now, that if you know what the Pontifical Academy is at the Vatican, right, you must understand that these people don't just, wow, I need to get my thing back on the screen and I'm having problems. Okay, good. Let me see if I could get to, ooh, what's going on here? Good. Can you see me, guys? Are you seeing me on the screen? Let me see if I can put back. Yeah, you're seeing me. But let me see if I can get this back to the screen I would like it to be. Okay. No. Why is this thing always bothering me here with the? Okay. Good. Probably better. Yeah. Okay. So if you know who Jeffrey Sachs is, you'll understand that he is a Vatican shill. And if you understand also the Vatican, they have always spoken against capitalism, because the Vatican wants us to be a socialist, a grand communist socialist states. That is what they're working towards, right? So a person like Jeffrey Sachs, he'll come on and tell us all of the ills of capitalism, in the same way we're hearing all of the ills of the United States and the West, but we hear nothing good about what they've done. But right now, China and the East, Russia and all these countries are what we need to look at. They are the model states, the model of the new democracy that we want in our world, right? Because they're not warmongers, right? They're not warmongers. They are wonderful people who want the entire world to unite and come together. That's the new sort of philosophy, the new sort of message that we're hearing. And people digest these things, say everything that you hear from the West is propaganda, but everything that you hear from Russia and China is real deal. Now, where are we going as a world if we think like that? To say that one culture, everything is evil about it, everything is falsehood that they disseminate, right? While the other, everything, isn't that a religion? Isn't that a secular religion that you believe that one is morally upright and the other is morally inferior, right? And how is that going to affect you in terms of your thinking and your ability to think objectively and to think clearly, to think critically? You can't, because you must understand that all cultures have some element of truth. While we know that politics, for the most part, are lies, but there are parts to it that might be true. And we have to accept that which is true and reject that which is false. But we're living in an era where people they don't read, and they're coming to you who read and understand what's going on, telling you that, oh no, that's propaganda. Everything that comes from the West is propaganda. Yet still you're on YouTube. So what are you? YouTube is Western, sort of invention. Why are you on YouTube if everything that comes from the West is propaganda? Okay, we've got to grow up now and begin to understand that it's not just knowing a word and and becoming obsessed with that word does not mean that you understand the meaning of the word. Now, then we have Pope Francis's biggest mistake was China. They were saying a desire to deal with Beijing led to papal silence on human rights. This is what and this person seems to be Catholic. As the Catholic Church and the world mourns the death of Pope Francis, reflects on his legacy, and looks to the future with the election of a new pontiff, the Vatican would do well to review its approach to China. Francis pontificate contains much more for which advocates of human rights can be grateful. Yet the Vatican's China policy is not one of them. A pope who spoke often about injustice and persecution around the world failed to speak on the atrocities in China. Although vocal about Sudan, Yemen, Gaza, and Myanmar, his silence about the persecution of the Uyghurs, the Tibetans, the Falun Gong practitioners, and Christians across China was deafening, and a conscious choice to look away. And aren't we finding the same thing happening in US media and around the world, that what we see is more the deification of Chinese culture right now, where people, because they're silent and they're quiet, right, and they're not the ones to be expressive and to be public with whatever they do, right, then we think that they're innocent, that they are the least warmongers among us, and that we need to pattern their behavior. As a result of that, many Caribbean citizens think that Chinese investment in the region is the way to go because they're helping us. They're not trying to enslave us, because they've never enslaved anybody according to you. They've never colonized anybody according to you because of your lack of understanding and also knowledge. All right? They've never. So why do you think the Chinese and the Japanese are in rift? Because the Japanese remember, the Chinese rather. The Chinese remember, Japanese colonization of them, right? And the fact of the matter is that the world in which we live, China was once an empire, right? And an empire doesn't mean that you're kind and you're nice. An empire means that you are going to conquer. That's what it means. You are going out there to conquer nations, to take over nations' resources. So don't think that China was all of this great thing that you're thinking it is. And it's innocent, and it's really, benevolent, philanthropic. And what are the traps laid for us? And they're traps. And we have already fallen in those traps. And what is happening right now, very soon, I think we are going to be colonized, even physically, demographically, by Chinese people. Because China, as we know, is overpopulated. And they're going to send their people right to the Caribbean. Right? So all of this talk about immigrants coming here, first they begin with the Africans. So you're going to start with the Africans to appease you. You're going to think, wow, the Africans are coming. They're our brothers and sisters. And then they move now to the Chinese, because they are the ones coming very soon, and they are coming to take over. They're coming to take over the entire region, right? So the US can talk all it wants to talk, because they're working together in terms of the global surveillance network system that we have in the world, and China is going to play a very important role in this global surveillance state, right? So please bear that in mind. Now, we have China did not force anyone to sign on the dotted line. Now, when you say they didn't force anyone, what do you mean? Yeah, we have to also ask that. When we say they didn't force, we can also say that that lots of the IMF and the whatever weren't forced to sign it too. But one of the things that we have to also understand, we don't know what happens behind the scenes. Oftentimes we are just told, we just see what we see. But as we're saying here, Stephen, many of the documents that were signed are not, the details of which we are not even privy to. So we're just seeing what we're seeing, but what they're telling us, there are other things to these agreements that we really don't know. Okay, that we really don't know. And one of the things about human beings that we must understand, when they have a lot of money, they might not point the physical gun at your head, but they control in matters of agreements that are being signed, right? They do that. And, what can we do? Now, if anyone has a problem with trying to roast blame United States NAFTA agreement, yeah, well, that is one agreement. That is, remember now, we're now trying to dissect, Stephen, one empire different from the other. All right. What we're saying is that you have two different superpowers. One has its methods of imperial undertakings. Another has its own method of imperial undertakings, but the agenda is the same. Oftentimes what we do, we conflate two things, or we conflate two countries or two cultures, but they will behave differently, but they have the same agenda. Even during the pandemic, China behaved differently from the United States, even though they had the same agenda, right? But they behaved to some extent differently. But the same agenda was vaccination, was the total eradication of your rights. All right, so this is what we have to understand, that two empires, two countries, and we have distinct cultures around the world, but we're going to have, it's leading us to the one world government is going to be an agenda, but they have different methods of achieving that agenda. So let's not be now naive. That we have here, the agreements to build highways. Yes. Now, the agreements to build highways, remember we were just saying, if you were on the program before, Stephen, that we were discussing the fact that these highways are also going to be used of surveillance. They're making surveillance. So all of these highways that they're building, the ports that they're building, right, they have surveillance equipment right there. It's a part of the construction. So imagine that when they shall have implemented all of this matter of the surveillance state, you are riding on the highway and they want to get you. They just stop you there. They know where you are. They know what highway you're riding on, right? And the Caribbean citizens here, we don't have that skill. We don't have that sort of equipment and things in the region to do that, right? So the Chinese are doing that. And that is also happening in the United States. So everywhere that they're not just building highways, they're building systems of global surveillance. And that's what we're saying here. So the agenda is still the same. NAFTA got the ball running, yes, and all of our things and all of the agreements with China. Remember now that I'm saying again that the United States agreements then, not now, but then the NAFTAs and so forth were more transparent, and they discussed what they were going to do, right? If you read the document agreement, you'll see the Chinese agreement. How many of us have that in hand about the Chinese agreement and what all of the conditions of the conditionalities of these agreements that the government entered into agreement with? We don't have these things. We're just talking because we just hear what they say. We see what they're doing, but we don't know the underlying conditionalities. But for the most part, Americans are delusioned by the propaganda that these legacy networks spreads, and that's a fact. The same thing for China. Right, the same thing for China. If you talk to the Chinese, I taught a lot of Chinese students, right? And they used to tell me too that they can't believe anything coming out of their Chinese government and the state-run media. So yes, and in fact, everything that we're doing in the West right now, we're copying from what they are doing there in China and the East. These are things, in fact, you will talk to Russians in the United States now, Sentient, and if you talk to recently arrived immigrants from Russia, from China, and from some of these states, these non-Western states, they will tell you that lots of what they're seeing in the United States right now is what they experienced in their countries, and that's what led them to leave. So they're running right back from their country into the same experience right now in the United States. So yes, I agree with you that the United States, media is filled with a lot of propaganda. However, because you still have an element of freedom there, it's still not yet taken over fully, right? The Constitution still has not yet been repealed, right? So they still have some element of truth. And if you dig closely, you still can find it. It's hard to do that in China because China doesn't have that constitutional rights to whistleblowers and all of these things that the United States and the West have access to. So we must be careful of that. You're not going to go to China and find whistleblowers there. They're just not there. And if you dare try to be a whistleblower, you are going to be killed. But we're seeing that now coming to the West. It has not yet been fully implemented, but it's coming here. But we still have a small window of freedom of expression. It's rapidly declining, it's rapidly dissipating and disappearing, but the fact of the matter, we still do have it. Do not underestimate and try to take advantage of the little that you have now of freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and freedom of information, because that's not available in China, neither is it available in Russia. So we have the next thing is I don't take part in politics. I don't vote in the system. This vomit, right? This is vomit, right? You can't have the electoral college and a popular vote and say that's democracy, right? Because really, the electoral college is what determines, right, who wins, right? The democracy where people go and vote is just about, just to keep the people think that they are actually participating in an active democracy when they're not. But I've always, it's really, really hard to understand U.S. voting system, right? It's complicated. And I can understand why the founding fathers used it, because the country is massive. And how do you get everybody to participate and yet still have a system that might show some form of equality? Because when you look at what happens in California, California is a big state. And in comparison to another smaller state, if you should have these people vote and just say that is just the participatory democracy without the electoral college, then of course California is going to have a greater say and other bigger states in the election than smaller states do. So to some extent, if you look at it carefully, it does give some democracy. But guess what, ladies and gentlemen, let me just say something here. In this world, you'll never be equal, we'll never be fully free, right? So don't fool ourselves, right? There's nothing called equality, all right? We can try, we can work towards it. That is our goal, but there's no society, including in the communist countries that you go to. As we said, we've talked about Cuba before, and all of this is a communist state, and there is no equality. The leaders live better than the citizens, right? So there's no equality in any system, but we have to work with the best way we can and work towards achieving. I must say now, don't stop working towards achieving it, but nobody is always going to see you. Even in families, we don't have all brothers and sisters. Your siblings are not all on equal footing, as seen by your parents, So we have to understand that this is the world we're living. It's not a perfect world. It's a flawed world. Ross Perot, yes, warned us about this. He did. And I did also, talk about the NAFTA agreement. I've written a lot about the NAFTA agreement. And so that was the North American Free Trade Agreement between Mexico and Canada and the United States. And we know that that agreement was what has deindustrialized the United States to a large extent, right? And Mexico too, and all the countries, Canada. This guy has a colonized mind. He wants his American visa just like all the corrupt Caribbean elites. Why would I want an American visa? So you tell me. And how do you know that I perhaps don't have one? What are you talking about? Do you know me? I don't know. He does not research and repeats what is being fed to. Come on, Lion Champion. I can't take that on now. You'll have to speak. If you have something to say, let's talk it and speak it in substantive. You're talking too much nonsense. Now, you might have to go back to your religion of blackness and whatever. We're not here to talk about religion of blackness, because that is not a religion, and you have to just wake up to see that that is not so. You're the one saying to Lion Champion how China was going to, defend Venezuela. It didn't happen. Lots of other things that you said didn't happen. Right? I was right when I told you that, China and Russia were not going to defend Venezuela. You said they were going to defend them, right? Because they were working against U.S. imperialism. Did you say that? No, but now you're wrong. You're always wrong. And now you're back telling me nonsense, right? So you have to now check what you're talking about. Get rid of this West versus East, and let us look at imperialism as a global threat to humanity. That is what we are saying here. We're not saying the West is better, Americans are better, or we're not saying that, Russia is an evil state and, and China is godly. We're not saying that. What we're looking at this channel is how imperialism manifests itself throughout the world and in all powers, global powers, whether through China or through Russia, or through any of these powers that be. And we're saying that we're not here to take sides. What we're trying to do is to make nonsense, because we're living in Babylon. The Rastafarians are, and you are a Rasta Lion Champion. I don't know if you have that philosophy, but the fact of the matter is that they talk about the Babylonian system that we're living in right now. And it is true. Babylon means confusion. that we don't know if we're going east or west, because there's so much confusion that we don't know what is true from what is falsehood. So you tell me what is propaganda, because many people don't know. And they don't, because what they're hearing from China, Chinese propaganda. What they're hearing from America, American propaganda. What they're hearing from Great Britain, Britain propaganda. So which is true? Which is true? What we do know is that Russia is not the truth. What we do know, America is not the truth. So we try to read as much and to compare and to contrast, and then we can determine what is truth. That is what we have to do, and not talk about East and West. Yeah, so we have this, what are you, then we have the first of all, land champion. Let me just say something. There's no white or black man. All right. And you go and read from the scientists. Nothing is white. There's no race. It's the West, as you should know, which came up with that sort of system of white and blackness as a way of trying to debase a certain group of people. Right. But there's no white or black race. Get with it. Go and read up that. And you can come and talk to me afterwards. Now, look at what is happening to Germany right now, honey, and Volkswagen. Yes. What they have done deliberately, Stephen, is to have deindustrialized us. Having deindustrialized the world at large, the West, right, and other countries, the Caribbean, because we also have been deindustrialized. Then they can now have us poor. When we're poor, then they can control us more. The same thing they have done in the United States. They have deindustrialized the United States. Having deindustrialized the United States, then after the people are poor, then they can control. So economics is very much tied to global slavery, to global enslavement. And that is what we're seeing right now in the region. Now, we're not here to say that the West is the only one trying to enslave us, because the world powers, the other global powers, are likewise doing the same thing in different ways, using different methods, but it's going to be the same thing: one world governance. One world governance. And we didn't say disunited world. No, you have United Nations. You don't have disunited nations. They say that they are united, right? They say that they are united, and they're united means that they have a purpose, right? Now, it doesn't mean, therefore, that everybody is going to agree, but they have to agree to disagree. During the pandemic, I'm sure they all did not agree on everything that they were doing. And we could see that. We could see. Even among the pro-Vs, they were not all in agreement with what everybody was doing, but the agenda remained the same. And it was global vaccination. Okay? And if you did not do it, you lost your jobs. And I'm very happy that Redacted, with Clayton Morris and Natalie, they're still keeping that in the public's eye, because they realize that the people have forgotten what is happening, and they can't make the connection between what is happening now with what happened during COVID. There's no connection. Then we have here WHZ saying, money talks and BS walk, right? Leaders paid money to impoverish its citizens. Absolutely. And it's not that we want to say these things, it's what is happening. And I'm not saying we want them to happen, right? Many of my realities, I don't want them to happen to me, but guess what? They're happening. And if they're happening, you have to say they're happening. If you wake up one morning and you're down, and people ask you, how are you doing? Oh, I'm doing well, right? How much does it help you? You just say, I'm not feeling well today, right? Why tell them lie? Why lie to them and tell them that you are great and you're having a great time? And you would like to have a great time, but you're just not having a great time right now, right? And people do that. We lie. We lie because we want to please somebody. We don't want people to, I don't want him to think that, something is happening to me, right? But so I don't want the world, people like Land Champion, think that I'm against China, I'm against the East, I'm against Russia. No, but I do know that there are no saints, right? That the Chinese and the Russians are no saints. Americans are also no saints. And they work together. They're on the same United Security Council, right? And even though they were on the same United Security Council, for the war against Venezuela, the kidnapping of a president, China and Russia have done nothing, and they sit on the United Nations Security Council, and they have done nothing more than rhetoric. Oh, Dan, they say this, and you take it and you run with it. Oh, Russia is sending some weapons. I could see it behaving like children. Russia is sending weapons to defend Maduro, and that did not happen. But you imagined that it was going to happen, and you viewed a lot of videos, nonsense, right? And then what happened. Maduro was taken out of power. I didn't want that to happen, but I knew, based on my knowledge, that was what was going to happen, that Maduro was not going to be defended. So we have to wake up. Then we have the popular vote is indicative of democracy, whereas the Electoral College is part of the scam. Who is the scam? The capital of the world, America. Yes, but we're saying to Sentian that if the popular vote, if they were to just have by the popular vote, states that are bigger and the states that are smaller, the ones who are smaller can say, well, that did not reflect my belief system, because because I voted and most of them voted, but the larger states, because they have more people, then they are the ones who are going to say that they own the country. So I understand your perspective, and the founding fathers understood that too, but they had to go back to the drawing board and realize that if they were to make something a little bit more that looks a little bit more equal, they had to do the Electoral College thing. But it still has maybe some hammering, some more refinement to do. So probably we need to refine it more. But I think that the fact is that we just can't have the raw popular vote like that, because that too in the United States, because we have to understand the United States is a big country, right? It's states that are united. When the United States worked, before it became the United States, it was just a colony of different states, they were united. Right, but after the independence and they became now United States, right, they had to deal with that sort of big terrain. And then afterwards, even during slavery, they were acquiring more states, right, like the Midwest, California and all of these states. So the fact of the matter is that they had to find a way how they were going to make each people's voice at least equally heard. I mean, that perhaps will never happen in such a big country, but I think they did the best that they could do. But I think I understand why they did it. I asked a Cambridge University professor when I drove Uber in Boston, Massachusetts, to make me understand what is the true reasoning behind the Electoral College. He said, it's complicated, scam alert. It is complicated. It is complicated. And I said it too, because just the main reason I'm saying to you, Sentian, that, what if the person from California and the person from a small state, they're going to say it's not fair. The same argument would be still, people would still complain, because let me say something to you guys. And land champions will say, oh, you want a god from the sky to jump out. Human beings cannot create anything that is perfect, right? Human beings, it's impossible for human beings to create anything that is flawless. We are flawed creatures, and we have our biases, we have our limitedness in knowledge, even though we think we know a lot. We don't know as much as we think we know, right? And because of that, our systems are not going to be equal, are not going to be perfect. And I think what we expect from times when you hear people talk about the world that they yearn for, they want equality and they want perfection and they want the kumbaya thing, and it's not going to happen, right? And then more so add sin to our lives, that the fact that we are wicked creatures, right? Then what do you think? What do you expect? A very terrible combination, wicked and flawed at the same time, right? That's a terrible combination. Now, that's it. People refuse to understand that these great powers, Craig is saying, are working together. They are. They are. We are not the ones working together with them. That's what we're saying. The elites, the leaders, joined by the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, They are in it together. We heard about the global reset, that the world should come together, work together. And so when we have problems like pandemic and all these things, wars, that we can all combine our efforts and say yes. So think about the mark of the beast. When the mark of the beast is implemented, the entire world is going to enforce it. The entire world, just like the pandemic, is going to enforce the mark of the beast. Why? Because they've been working together. They might not like each other, but they might see you as a common enemy. And that makes them work together. All right? So they're building the foundation, the bridge of the New World Order. Okay? And that is what they're doing. So how could they not be working together under United Nations and the World Economic Forum? If they weren't working together, then you wouldn't have United Nations. All right? As much as Trump is chatting about the United Nations and he believes in America, he would have said end United Nations. He's not doing that because he knows that the United States is a part of the world order. He understands that, but he talks a lot for his base. But, deep down, when he goes behind the scenes, he knows that it's a different agenda. And that is what we have to understand. Let me see what you're saying here, Lion Champion. I don't want to ignore you, but sometimes, just say what you have to say and don't talk about. Russia and China did send weapons to Venezuela. Maduro was sold out internally by some of the elites, most likely because they didn't want to fight. Yes, and I do agree with you, but did some of the people from China and Russia also betray him? I think some of them did, right? And that's why we can't trust them. I think some of them did, Lion Champion. I think some of them did, because that is a whole matter, that, the United States, for example, when it's now in a war with Iran, right? And I reported some time ago on a video in which, the United States was actually working with Russia and telling Russia that if you don't share information, with the Ukraine, and something about working in the Ukraine, that if Russia stops from doing what it was doing in the Ukraine, then I think it was sharing information with Iran. Russia was sharing information with Iran. So if they stop, but something about the war in Iran, not in Iran, the war in Ukraine, that if Russia had desisted from doing that, then the United States would, would probably stop the war in Iran. Something of the sort. There was some negotiation that they were in. We must understand that while they're giving us the news, behind the scenes, they are negotiating, and oftentimes it's about land, it's about money, it's about many other things. So while you think Russia and China might be on board with Venezuela, if the U.S. finds that it can have some diplomatic, agreement with Russia, then it will behind Venezuela's back and defeat Venezuela, or betray, I should say, Venezuela. And that's what they often do, right? It's complicated and demonic, but it is. He loved his myths so fiercely. Okay, well, you have a myth about thing capturing Russia and and China. We're going to defend Venezuela. Land Champion, that was what you said, and it was a lie. It was a myth. You have a myth now that China is not as aggressive a nation as the United States and other countries, and that is a myth. Right? They're not the same in terms of the same tactics, the same methods, but ultimately it's going to be the same, right? The same world agenda. Go and read up on it. I can't read it for you. I can't teach you when you don't want to be taught, right? I can only teach you when you are teachable, right? And that's what you have to do. Religion has truly turned some of our people. Guess what? Religion, you are religious. Yours is a simplistic religion that Africa is going to be redeemed, and then Africa is going to save you and the world. It's not going to happen. That's a simplistic religion, right? Okay. Any other comments before we end the live? Any other comment? Any other? Yeah, I get my sources from multiple sources, not like you, Lion Champion, getting it from just Africa and Russia, right? I get my sources from all over the world. right? Because I'm not locked into one belief that this is, I know the world is working on agenda, so I'm not necessarily siding with any. Africa, I don't side with Africa, I don't side with Europe, I don't side with anybody. I side with the truth. And if the truth is coming from Africa, well, run with it, because that is what I want to do. We have here, Craig is saying, Russian Chinese offerings are mainly for public consumption, right? And not meaningful interventions. You know, the thing about it is that Russia and China are not, as we're saying, transparent states. Right? They're not states that are going to chat as much as Americans do. Americans are chatting state, and they chat their way to even death, right? They chat a lot. So the fact, because of the freedom of expression that was, you know, a sort of right in the Constitution. So you won't find, it's good in the sense that because they chat a lot, sometimes that's why they even get, you know, hit, because people betray each other because they find themselves chatting what they should not talk. But in Russia and Chinese culture, they know how to keep secrets. Right, so we don't know what the half of what they do. All these agreements in the Caribbean and in other parts of the world, in Africa, we don't know what is in those agreements. But the Africans are very suspicious for the most part of the Chinese. Right, they're very, very suspicious. They're equally suspicious and equally speaking against what they're doing on the continent. Lion Champion can talk like that because, you know, he's living in the States now, and life perhaps is not as bad for him as the Africans for the most part. So they see what is happening. He doesn't see that. But when he begins to feel the pain, then he will begin to see what is true and what is not true. So you can still live in your myth and think of the black and white world and think that that is reality. Maybe you need, for your mental health, to get out of the United States, live somewhere where there's black-white mentality, because that is what is creating this sort of unease in you, Lion Champion, thinking that all white people, all Europeans are, you know, evil and the others are wonderful people. Get out of that mindset. And why be with them then if you did not want to, if you see them as evil? Right. But we're not here to say people are evil, guys. We're here to say, to call a spade a spade. And if it's China, we're going to say it needs to be dealt with. If it is Russia, we're going to say it needs to be dealt with properly. Read lots of Frank Fanon works, Lion Champion. I've read all those works, right? But it's what I take what is for me, and I throw out that which is not for me. That is critical thinking. As I told you, human beings are not perfect. So from Du Bois to Marcus Garvey to all the people that I have spoken about, and I read, all human works are flawed, and you have to take, you know, what is for you and throw out that which is not for you, right? Because we're all flawed. No economic system created by human will ever be perfect. No religious system created by human will ever be perfect. No political system created by humans will ever be perfect. And that's what we're talking about, the Constitution of the United States and the whole matter of the participatory, you know, democracy versus the Electoral College. Great job that the founding fathers did, but it was not perfect and will never be perfect. And if somebody should attempt to do it now from Harvard University, it's not going to be perfect, because human beings, but I can tell you that what the founding fathers did with that Constitution was the most perfect that we could ever get to perfection. Then we have Lion Champion should study military theorists like Carl von Clausewitz and others. Modern conflicts are hidden, not visible. Right. They are hidden. They are hidden, and that is what we have to understand. So when we seeing, you know, that the U.S. is against that country and that is against that country, what is hidden? What are we not seeing? And that is how I get my information, Lion Champion, by the way. That is how I begin now to research. What are we not seeing here? They're telling us this and they're telling us that over there. What are we not hearing? What should we know that we're not being told? And oftentimes, we are not told a lot, right? And when people hear it, they take sides because they heard from the East and they heard from the West, and they run with it on either side. And, oh, that's what it is. You're talking, everything else you're talking is propaganda, and it doesn't work like that. All right, is using terrorists to attack African countries evil? Yes, it is evil. And that's what we're saying. Lion Champion, you're still asking me the same questions I've answered you hundreds of times. I'm telling you that I don't see US as righteous. I see them as the devil, right? And I see Russia as the devil too, right? I see Russia as the devil too. So I don't see any of them as being in this innocent, righteous position. They're not. They will kill at a second, right? At the batting of the eye, they'll get rid of you. Right? So you tell me if they're wonderful, even Jamaica, talk to Jamaicans and look at the state, how that state is operated, right? And how the state can be very brutal. Right? These states can be brutal. These states can be brutal. When you see the Syrian head chopper invited to the White House, Elise and 10 Downing Street, what is your conclusion? Give me what is my conclusion? What is my conclusion in terms of what? What is the point? What the point? They all meet, don't they? And behind the scenes, by the way, one of the things we must understand, as I'm answering Land Champion, Trump and after the pandemic, there are things that would be hidden, as Land Champion is pointing out right here, or I think he'd like to point out, because it would make them, a little bit embarrassing. After the pandemic, because of what they did, we see them now, hand in glove with terrorists. They're walking with terrorists. They're chatting with them. They're telling us the agenda, right? And it doesn't bother them. Look at what happened when the students were protesting in the United States against the genocide in Palestine, and what even the Democrats and the Republicans did to the students, which is their democratic right to protest against U.S. genocidal, what do you call it now, undertakings in Palestine. And the United States actually, went there and wanted to, they did some crazy things to the kids. They suppressed them. They suppressed their voices. So what we're seeing now in the U.S. and in the West and in the world at large are not normal, Land Champion. And it doesn't mean, therefore, that China doesn't do that. It doesn't mean that Russia doesn't do that. It's only because they don't show us when they're doing these things, because they are more opaque. They are more opaque than the United States and the West. Why do you bring Russia into my question? Did they attack Africa? That is not true. Now, when you say attack Africa, what do you mean by that? Because they're in Africa right now, right? They're in Africa right now. They might not be battling in terms of just like the Chinese, having guns and killing the people, right? As in some cases America does. But these economic agreements that are being entered into, are being brokered, a lot of times they are raping. They're raping the resources of the African continent, of the African countries. So yes, from that perspective, what I'm saying to you, they might not be as militaristic, because they are not as, they are not the reigning global empire right now, like Russia. So what they're doing now, they will work on other things, like surveillance, like economic raping and pillaging, but they're still accomplishing the same thing, the impoverishment of Africa. It shows they are compatible with terrorism. Yeah, they are. This is because they created these groups. Absolutely. Yes, of course. And we have spoken about this Land Champion, you should know me. I have spoken about these things before. That the United States has created ISIS and all of these other groups. Why do you think they got rid of the same guy there? Mr. Perry always talks about him, from Libya, right? They got rid of him, and he had those people under control. The guys, they're also in Iraq, the one that they killed, right? Saddam Hussein. He had these terrorists under control too. And the United States understood and went there and then worked with these terrorists to do very bad things and to unseat countries in the country that they wanted to unseat. So we know that the United States work with the shower posse of Jamaica, right? And all the gangsterism in Jamaica. What's new? We know they did that, right? We know they did that. All of the crime and violence and these gangs we have in the region, we know came from the CIA. The guns heading to our region, flooding the region, killing off our people left, right, and center, coming from the US. These are very well-known facts. So there's no thing you're saying here. Lion Champion, you're pretending as if I'm saying I love the United States and oh wow, the United States is wonderful. That's not what I'm saying. I don't think people understand that I'm saying that too. I do not love white nor black. No, what I'm saying to you, human nature is evil. Human nature is evil. And that is why you can't believe anybody right now. How many friends do you have, Lion Champion? And how many of them, you've lived long enough, how many of them might have betrayed you? People who laugh with you, who might have shared with you in your house. The Bible says that the human heart is desperately wicked above all things, right? And it is true. And that's why people will say to you, whether they're religious or not, that they keep few people human friends, because humans are the quickest to betray you. Wicked heart. With all the critical thinking, one world order is here. It's not yet fully here, but it's coming to be. It's coming slowly rising into being. You know nothing, just what do you know? You tell me. What do you know, Lion Champion? I don't think you're saying anything new. You're saying things that we all of us have been talking about on this channel. And so what do you know? So we have the United States overthrew the president of Syria and installed a known terrorist. Right. Yeah, because that is what they want. Remember now, I did say to you on a live recently that the New World Order, I read this years ago, that the criminals are the ones who are going to be our government. Do you know that? I told you that. And somebody was asking me, do you really mean so? I said, yes. The terrorists are the ones who are going to be the criminals on the streets, are the ones who they are going to have to control us. So when you don't want to comply with something that they say, they'll have the wickedest of criminal to go and slap you up. And they're going to do it to drive fear into your heart. Right? And you have some evil people out there. Just go to the prison cells and you see some very dangerous creatures, almost like animals, like wild animals. Cognitive dissonance is what you have. But, okay, if I have cognitive dissonance, I wonder what you have. I wonder what yours would be. Maybe to some extent I'm demonstrating that, but I would like to know if I am, because if I have an open mind and I'm looking at the world as it is, and I'm not suggesting that one country is better than the other, then you tell me. You tell me now, Lion Champion, if you are not demonstrating cognitive dissonance, if you think China and Russia are better. Now, Russia and the West is using good cop, bad cop, absolutely manage decline of their targeted states. Yes, that's what they're doing. And then while we are saying, oh yes, Russia is this and Russia is that, and I'm not here saying, and Craig and I are not saying, Lion Champion, that if we see the United States doing something that is wrong, and particular to Russia or to China, we will call the United States out. That's what I believe in. Call them and say the United States was wrong and should not have done that, right? Even with the tariffs, I said that the United States was the one who created that sort of world order. So why are they blaming China now for being wealthy? The United States was the one who put more, invested more into the military than into the economy. So why are they blaming China for being such a economic giant? I have said these things because I believe in being balanced and not taking one side. But what I'm saying to you, I understand, as Craig is saying, that they're playing good cop, bad cop. At the end of the day, we're all going to be slaves. We're all going to be surveilled. We're all going to have to, join the climate change agenda. Right? Then we have quoting the Bible is like citing a myth to defend a myth. If you think the Bible is a myth, then let me know who created and what created Western civilization. It is out of the ashes of the Bible that the Enlightenment, let me educate you, came about. That modern science came about. That when we say enlightenment, you mean light came into the world. Because the Bible for many years was hidden by the Dark Ages from anybody. Nobody could read it according to the Catholic Church. So the Protestant Reformation was that which gave people, citizens, the opportunity to read the Bible. Then you had the likes of books and publishing houses and everything in Europe that came about, and that was further extended here to the Americas. So you need to grow up and stop talking about the Bible as a myth, because the Bible is far from a myth. It is the reality. It is truth in a dark world, whether we like it or not, because our school system has conditioned our brains to think that what man says is, and that is why we're suffering, because what man says is gospel, and what the word of the Lord says, who knows everything, is a myth. What a state of affairs that we're under right now. Western civilization is behaving as a pagan society, right? Because that's what we are. We're a pagan now civilization. I'm not suggesting that you should go and believe what the Bible says, but calling it a myth is a stretch, because it is what is at the foundation of enlightenment and the creation of Western civilization that you are benefiting from, Land Champion. Conviction doesn't turn stories into facts. It just reveals how deeply people would rather believe than question. I don't even know if you've read your Bible before. I don't even know if you've studied it. So I have to pity you. So we have, you don't like to think. Okay, good. So we have this was a very good chat in terms of our understanding of what China is doing in the region and understanding of global powers. We understand that despite the fact that they are playing good, bad cop, the fact of the matter, at the end of the day, they're going to control us. They want to slave us, and they want to make us into their own likeness. And by the way, the global elites are unhappy people. They are unhappy campers, and they want you also not to have peace and to be unhappy campers. You decide if you want to live in that sort of realm. We know too that our world is not just economics, as I told you, it's physical. We have the mental and we have the spiritual component. I am not here to tell you what food you need to put in your body. I'm not here to tell you what you need to read or think. I can suggest, right, what you need to think and what you need to read. Right? And your spirituality, I'm not able to tell you whether you to be Muslim, Hindu, Christian, whatever you want to be, voodoo, whatever you want to do. That is your choice to make. I'm just here to tell you that many of you are thinking that religion does not play a huge role in informing policies. I've read too many articles to you to show you that it does. Right? It forms the policies of the one world order. And I told you that the United Nations is more religious. It means interfaith religion. That is what they do at the United Nations. And that interfaith religion informs the global agenda, political agenda for the world. So we must understand, we must know. By the way, do you know that they have a building in Europe, right there in, I think it's in Germany, if I'm not lying, where they have the European Parliament, right, the EU Parliament, where they say that they're building the new, what you call it now, the new Tower of Babel, and they say that this time they are going to succeed. So they know that they're building a new Tower of Babel. And what do you mean by Babel again? Confusion. The entire world coming together in a confused state, like we see Land Champion. Confused. But we are not humble enough to say that we need the wisdom of a higher being than we are, wiser than we are, smarter than we are, and that is why we are going to be deceived. The new Tower of Babel is right in Brussels, right? It's in Brussels. They said they're going to succeed, right? They said that they're going to succeed. In fact, if I could look it up to show you, because you might think I'm just talking to talk. And I like to show you the new Tower of Babel in, I think it's in Brussels, as we said, new Tower of Babel in Brussels, right? And the building is the same. They're designing to say it's the same, right? It's the EU. Yeah, it's in Brussels, as you're correctly saying. Let me show you this, just to let Land Champion, who is very skeptical, and that's okay to be skeptical because you must question everything. I believe that too. All right, so let me get this on the screen and show it to you, because We're living in some dangerous times, people, and this is no joke. And then we have, okay, so we have this. This is the Tower of Babel by what's Bruegel, and it's the EU Parliament and Strasbourg. And we see here, look at the tower. So they are showing us the old tower that they think right there. So even though they're telling you the Bible is a book of myth, and where did the Tower of Babel come from? In fact, as a person who has studied languages, right? I have studied, that's what I did in college. And when they were teaching you translation, do you know that they say that the only reason given for which humans speak the varied languages of the world is because that's the only explanation, the Tower of Babel? Because it means confusion. Where when they were building the tower, right, to the high heavens, God intervened, stopped them, and what did he do? He confused their languages. And that was the first time in humanity that people started speaking different languages. And that is what secular people who study translation, say that's the only justification for the speaking of different languages by human beings. So we have the old Tower of Babel here, and then this is the Strasbourg here in Brussels, and this is the new one that they're actually mimicking the Tower of Babel. But look at what they're saying here. Pairing the European Union's new facility in Strasbourg with the medieval painter Bruegel's Tower of Babel has occurred to not a few on the internet, and not without very good reason. You can almost assume that the designer intended to dare critics to draw the obvious comparison. Modern architects are like that, right? But the EU is a fount of many voices. Out of many, one, so to speak. And what's this now? The word is here. Is not seeing this word here. Paramounting to Babel, or amounting to Babel in the eyes of the critics. But the critics may be correct. The EU is a quagmire, but less of a Babel, literally or figuratively, than the United Nations. Many more voices, even more babblicious, babblicious, which means that they are building, as it were, a tower, a new Tower of Babel, right? Now, what does that mean for us? What does that mean for us as people? We have to ask ourselves, what is that saying for us? And what does that mean? It means, therefore, that we are going to be in a situation where people are telling you that the Bible is not true and it's a demonic book, or it's not, it's for simpletons, while they are using it for their own, not for God's glorification, but for their own glorification to enslave you, right? You have to understand, and that's exactly what they're doing. But isn't these people the same people who try to dissect and find the God practical with a large, high collider? Yes, and it's amazing to see when people don't want to accept truth, what they do to discern or to find truth. Right? They'll go to any length to say to you that God doesn't exist or he whatever. At the same time, they're not able to come up with any reasonable explanation. Quoting the Bible to prove the Bible is true is intellectual laziness. Well, quoting history is also intellectual laziness, or quoting science is intellectual laziness. You tell me, because the Bible is only just another book, right? So you tell me. Hence, the Most High is unleashing fire on these heathens, right, on all of us, because God is a God of love and mercy. He gives us freedom of choice, and it's either we want to accept it or we want not to accept it. During the Tower of Babel, he told them that they should not. God would not have destroyed the world by a flood, and they said that they don't know. They said, "Oh, we don't believe what God says." So they decided now to build a tower, or attempted to build a tower, and God confused their languages. And that's what they're doing again. They're intending to build the world, to connect the world together into a one world government, because they think that that's the only way that they can control the world, that Lucifer can control the world by connecting us into one village, right? And very soon, language we're going to be talking? We'll be talking AI language. That is going to be the new language that they're going to create, AI language. All of us understand AI language, so we'll be able to communicate vis-a-vis AI language. So it's either we want to believe God and his word, or we believe whatever man says. You choose. But Babylon right now, we have so many different narratives. We have narratives coming from Russia, narratives coming from China, narratives coming from all over the world. And people are confused. People don't know what to believe. They're confused. And so they take side with ever. If you don't want to take side with God, then you stay in your confusion. And you will be confused because the enemy of soul is going to seek to confuse you. So that was it. Thank you so much for joining. I think we have spoken enough. And that is for sure. The Bible is not actual history. The Bible is actual history. The Bible is an authentic history. If it were not, they could not use it for why languages actually came into being and lots of other things. So get with it, Learn Champion. You have to study it, read it for yourself, and try to humble yourself, and you'll learn because you have lots of things to learn. All the best to you and have a great night. See you then.